All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started today. Before we get started, I wanted to point out a couple things. Obviously, we're working on lecture 107 and exercise 107 today, but I also recently posted your next assignment. I know the assignment 101 isn't due until Monday. It's a good time to remind you that it's due on Monday. But the next one I'm adding to the list so that you know what's coming, and we're actually going to talk about it in lecture format today just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And before I get into the actual lecture, I want to pull up the assignment here. So let me get into assignments on Canvas, just so that we can have a quick chat about it. It's going to be due on the 23rd. So that's after you have your President's Weekend. So it's the Wednesday after. We don't have class that Monday. So anyway, what we're going to be doing with this is it's an extension of our Photoshop piece of the class. And this is where we get into more advanced Photoshop techniques. What we're going to do is we're going to combine images that don't belong together. And the more you bend reality, the more entertaining these images tend to be. So a simple swap out is not necessarily as exciting as something where you're bending the laws of physics or whatever. But I'm going to show you a bunch of examples today so that you're getting ready. But I just want you to be aware that this is coming and that this is the assignment. It is very important as part of this that you use your own photographs for the assignment. So you need to go out and take your own photos. I don't want you using images online. And that is really because I want you to think carefully about the lighting in a particular scene, because the lighting is really what makes or breaks a Photoshop collage. And if you've been online and you've seen Photoshop collages before, the ones that you can tell that are Photoshopped are generally because there's some problem with light. And so if we can solve the problem with light by taking care of your own or taking your own images, we can end up with far, far better results. So let me minimize that and we'll start the actual lecture part. Today's kind of a combination of lecture and demo. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time doing demo today than necessarily I do every day. But when we start looking at this, the end results of these can end up being rather creepy. And this is what I'm talking about, the bending of reality. And part of the reason that these work is because the lighting conditions allow you to bend reality in these kinds of ways. So this is the most simple one. And if you're just starting out in Photoshop, I encourage you to do something along these lines. This is fundamentally two different pictures. You have a picture that you take with you standing in the scene, and the picture is capturing you here and also your reflection in the mirror there. What you then do is you use masking, which we're going to cover in depth today, to take a second photo of this man that's standing here with his reflection. And then you're combining the two images. So you're essentially cutting out where this mirror is. You're cutting out right there. And when you cut that out, you're swapping the original photo that has his reflection in it for the photo that just has the reflection of the older man. And it's telling a story. This is what you look like when you're older. That's just plain creepy. I don't even know what to say about that. So is that. That might be more creepy. This one I think is less successful because it hasn't as carefully considered the lighting strategies. This, however, is really, really creative. And I think some of this stems upon how you see the world and what similarities you might see in the world. So if you look at the shoes in this image, the shoes kind of have these natural little crease marks in them. And so the person that came up with this idea said, those crease marks are an awful lot like the little knuckles on the toes. So if we blend the shoes, and as they come down, they turn into toes, we can use those little wrinkles to kind of transition it into the toes. I think this would be slightly more successful if it had more background. And I also think this part is particularly weak on the image in terms of how those are cut out, the thumb, etc. So there's always weaker parts to some of the images. Now, the ones that I'm showing you right now are primarily professional job. I'm going to get to a whole bunch of student examples. So we'll cover student examples, but this is meant to kind of inspire you. I think this one is really, really nicely done. The transition works well. The symmetry works well against the leaf. But again, lighting conditions really matter, and how you start from the original photo matters. And the fact that the darkness of the leaf here kind of works its way into the eye there. Those are both important factors in making this work. It also is a really strong diagonal. It's a good composition. So all the things that we talked about earlier really matter as we progress in here. So think about good composition, etc. So this here is a puzzle piece with the blurred image behind. Part of the reason that this is really successful is the image that's behind is blurred. So we don't get full detail out of it, but what's in the foreground is actually close to us. So this is as simple as taking, one or two photos, the one photo holding a puzzle piece here. It doesn't have to be a puzzle piece with this actual photo behind in it, but you need to be able to collage in that person or the eye into that puzzle piece, and then obviously cut it out here and make that part black. But I think part of the reason it's so successful is because the background is blurred. Sometimes it's a combination of drawing and you're working on a drawing, and that's then interacting with another piece of the image, etc. Sometimes it's seeing things that don't belong. So this is in a grocery store where all the carrots are stacked up, and then you swap out one of the carrot ends for a little eyeball, which would be incredibly creepy. I think the actual collage work could be a little bit better. I think it's a little bit rough around the edges, but and I also think that this, if we were following our rules of composition, this really should be over right about here. So it'd be on the rule of thirds. So there's always little nitpickies to go through, but I think the concept is there. It's something unexpected that's happening that isn't real. I love this one just because I think it's quite funny. The key here is how the shadow falls on the toilet. And that's part of what makes it relatively realistic. The fact that there's a little bit of a dent in the wrist as it goes through that little piece right there. Those are all important things when you're setting up the images to collage with. Sometimes converting part of the image to black and white can be helpful. They're using the earth and the cracked earth as the kind of the texture of the skin, and then the eyeballs kind of oozing out. Now these ones start to get fun, and I've had a lot of students do examples like this. This is really two separate photos. You're taking the picture of you standing, right, where you have your legs coming down with the pants down, etc. You take that picture, and this works best on a tripod, for example. You take that first picture, then you carefully step out of your pants and you take picture number 2. And then what you're doing is you're collaging picture number 2 right here so that it replaces where your legs are, and it makes it look like your legs aren't there. Sometimes these professional artists are incredibly good at the things that they do. I'm not asking for something in that level. This one's successful because of the light and how carefully they've thought about the light and the reflections of the shadow. So you can see a strong shadow right there. And it's really about a shift in scale. So you've got the small scale, and then you're doing the larger scale. This is just odd. I don't even know what to say. This is kind of like that first image that I showed you, where the person was looking in the mirror. The man was looking in the mirror and seeing an older reflection of himself. This is a similar idea, where you've got the kitten looking in at the pool of water, and they're seeing the reflection of the lion. Now, this would obviously be hard because you'd have to have a picture of a lion that you took to be able to do that. But the concept is there. The key is how the feet all match up, and making sure that those work. Sometimes it's about bending reality and making somebody stronger than they are, making things float, etc. Another bizarre one. I actually really like this one. I think it's creative shift of scale. And the idea that you're seeing this, and everything below is the image of the fish, except for a little bit of the rocks that have trickled their way down. Those are probably using clone stamp. And then the island and stuff is set up above the scene. the broken hands versus the broken pot. Another shift in scale. And it's again seeing those power lines and seeing how they could relate to, in this scenario, a guitar. And I love the fact that down here the guy's holding a giant pick instead of a snowboard or whatever. Another good example where you're combining images together. There's one image that is the person right there. There's another image with the clothes hanging off the table. And then there's another image with the feet hanging out of the clothes. So it's actually 3 images that have been combined together in this scenario. This is one where it kind of messes with the idea of perspective. What's the ceiling? What's the floor? So it's one shot from down low, one shot from up high, and the fact that the ceiling becomes the floor. I think this one's also pretty good, seeing the transition from the sheets into the snowy backdrop. This one is certainly environmentally, you have to be able to set up the pictures correctly for this to work. We need the perspective of the 2 images to work. And they've done a really, really nice job with how all of these sheets have the little gaps in them. So it really feels like they're hanging each one of these sheets, but each one of those is a mask. The giant zipper line. And this is really a pretty simple combination of a deck and an ocean, and the idea that you're painting into the ocean. Another example here of pulling the road through the weeds. So you're setting up one image that has the road, and you're also taking and transitioning an image of a person pulling a tarp. That tarp then transitions into the road, and you have to have the image of the person walking through the weeds to kind of create that. It tells a really nice story. I think this one involved a little bit more setup. Shift in perspective again. We've come to the edge, and then you shift this perspective down. Seasons change. I think this one's very creative in how they're coming together. Again, bending reality. So these are really about inspiring you to get to do something creative in Photoshop. So let's look now at some actual student examples as we go forward. These are all ones that are done as part of this class. Some of these I think you might have seen before on various handouts and what have you. But so this is kind of like seeing the picture in the clouds, seeing the animal in the rocks, and then collaging in the pieces. Arash didn't have any of these tattoos. Those were all the Photoshop work. This one just is plain creepy, but I think it's well done. I think the background's a little bit dark. I think it could be better if the background didn't feel quite so fake. I've always liked this one, and part of it is because it has a great rule of third composition with 1/3 and 2/3, but also because the transition is so subtle. The way that the nose connects together is just really carefully considered. The eyes and the shape of the eyes, and the fact that the eyes are the only part that's in color, the lips and how this part of the lip curls over with the whiskers, but the bottom of the lip is the person's lip, I think is just really, really tastefully done. Now, this one is not something that's spectacular in that, the image that it was shot with is not that exciting, but I think this is a great example of how when you carefully control light in a scene, you can easily combine images together. So the image of the pigs, the first image, it was shot at night with a front-on flash, nothing particularly exciting, looking straight at these pigs. When the student took the picture of his dog and was able to collage that in, he did the same thing. The picture was at night with a front-on flash looking directly at his dog. And so that combination allows these 2 images to come together. So even though they're not the most spectacular images, the way that they've come together is really well done. Sometimes they end up being a little more artistic than anything else. This is an example of a dancer that then the skirt turns into a flower, an upside down flower. Sometimes students do these kinds of examples where they're drawing part of the image or they're creating. I think this is nicely done because it's thought carefully about how the color's applied and where it's applied. This one is fantastic, pretty easy to set up. You're going to stand against the wall with your arms folded, with the shirt on, obviously. And then you take that picture. Again, the camera stays in the same place. So you've set it on a tripod or set it on a counter or something like that. You take this picture. Maybe you need help. Maybe you need a friend to take the picture for you. So you take the first picture, then you step away, and in your place, you hang the shirt on a hanger on the wall. And then it's a matter of collaging the shirt, right, that piece over the top of the piece where you're standing against the wall. This was a great one that Bakem did. She used one of the drafting stools in the computer lab to create this image. I think part of the reason that it's so successful is because the shadow is just as well done. So the light was taken, it's a tripod, same time the two pictures were taken. She was originally sitting on a stool, right? So there's the stool. The stool was casting a shadow on the wall back here. And she took the picture of her sitting on the stool, and then she left and took the stool away and took another picture. And she was able to use the masking techniques that we'll discuss in the demonstration today to get rid of the stool and get rid of the shadow of the stool. And now it looks like she's floating. John did this one a while back. Similar concept where you're laying the pants on the bed, and then you're taking two pictures. The division line is right here of the two pictures. So you're collaging those two together. This one actually turned out really well. I think compositionally it worked nicely. There was the first image of the student without his hand in the way. And then he took an image with the hand in the way. And then it's just a matter of masking to show these pieces through his hand. So this student was playing off of the idea of a cello. I think it would be a little more successful if there were some strings that were going here, because we're missing that. Drawing in the smoke, you can see a little bit of the drawing in the smoke. This is a talent to really, you have to be good at drawing to set something up like this. Now I challenge you to see the face here. This is one of those ones that's very, very well hidden, but very carefully considered. And I think it's really fun. The face is right here. This is a profile and a front-on photo that have been combined together. Half drawing, half photograph. Kind of interesting take on it. Photos being cut in half. I think this was in phase in the Walking Dead phase, where somebody set this one up back when that was really popular. A little floating orb. This is kind of like that one with the island. Okay, so we'll stop there. Let me get out of this. And now it's going to be time for some live demo. While I'm transitioning, does anybody have any specific questions about, come on, let me out.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
So are we able to like make a blend of like an older picture and then newer pictures that we taken, or do you want
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
I'm okay with that. But I want it to be pictures that you took.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the key. So yeah, if you want to blend other pictures, that's fine. If you're using an older picture, think carefully about how you recreate the lighting in the scene so that they belong together rather than trying to make them so that they don't belong together. Today we're going to spend time learning about masking and cutting objects out. That's what the demo will be in Photoshop. But next class we'll also talk about bringing those objects into a new scene and what that does and how you make them match up with the scene. So that's kind of what the next two lectures are about. So just pay attention to the lighting is my advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a lot of photo manipulations, so I have like a lot of previous work that I can incorporate for this project.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's fine with me.
Okay, awesome.
Do I have any other questions before we kind of continue on here? Nope. All right. Sounds good. So I went ahead and I pulled up the remote desktop. So you guys should all be seeing exercise 107 right now. That's what we're going to be working on. And in exercise 107, we're going to do two major things. The first one is we're going to isolate images. And I'll walk you through that in Photoshop. We're going to use something called the select and mask or the refine edge tool. And so I'll work you through that. I'll talk you through that process. But then the second part that we're going to be doing is something called a tiling texture. And that is a pattern that can repeat on itself. So I've asked in this exercise for you to do 5 isolated images and 3 tiling textures. That gives you a total of 8 images that you'd be turning in as part of your work. If you've worked for 2 hours and you've worked diligently and you can honestly say, yes, I've put in a lot of time, I've learned a lot after those 2 hours, and you didn't make it to 5 and 3, I'm okay with you turning in fewer. But I want you to put in a solid 2 hours worth of work on this. So make sure you kind of time yourself because that's what it's designed to be. Ideally, you'll finish 5 and 3. I think that's realistic. I've tried to set it up realistic, but I want to make sure that you know that it's about the time, not so much the quantity that you end up creating. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's open up Photoshop here. Sorry, I've got a few things open. All right, I have Photoshop open. And what I need to do is I need to start by finding an image that I want to cut out. So I'm asking you to find images of people, and then we're going to work with those people. Now, you all took an image, or you're supposed to take 5 images when you were doing exercise 103, and you can work with those images of people if you want. If you'd rather search for an image online, I would encourage you to look for a Creative Commons image. So I've gone to Unsplash, which is a good high resolution photo site that has free images and you don't have to have an account, which is awesome. So let's say a woman running, for example. And so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for somebody that is entirely in the scene. So I want to make sure that I'm getting the whole person, not just like, feet or partial body, etc. So I want to make sure I'm getting the whole scene. And ideally, I'm also kind of looking for someone right there. I'm looking very specific on this because I want to be able to show you how the hair works. So something like this is actually a good example for me. She's not running, but that would work. So let me go ahead and download this one. There we go. And some of these other ones might work as well. And that's why you end up kind of scrolling along. This is a great one with the hair. That would be a distinct challenge. I think the biggest challenge with that is, though, there's not really a foot showing in that image. So let's load more photos. And part of the reason that I always look for these images live in front of you is because I like you to see the process through which I'm trying to decide what image is the right image. And so that's why I'm kind of working my way through. That one's a pretty good image. That would be a good one. So you can pick any one of these. She's standing. That might be a good one. I don't think I'd pick the mud one. Oh, that one is definitely a challenging image. So maybe I'll download that one as well. Okay, so I have those images downloaded. Like I said, you're going to work on 5 images. You want them to be high resolution. So you don't want little low resolution grainy images because they're not going to cut out well. So let me go ahead and go to File and then Open. And these should have gone into my downloads folder. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and open them both. And we'll say Open. Come on, Photoshop. All right, so I'll start with this one. So what we're interested in, we're going to make the background of these images go away. So we don't care about the background at all. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this crop tool on the side. It's the 4th tool down, and I'm going to shrink the image to get rid of background. So I don't really need all that extra context. So we'll shrink that down shrink that down. We'll pull this one up. And we'll pull this one down like that. Now, as I'm looking at this image, right, I'll commit to it. This is actually a little bit awkward because the image is shot low. And so if we were using this as a collage, the image that we'd have to pick would be kind of a low image. She's really tall relative to the image. Let me go back to this image. Yeah, this one's a little bit better. And it would collage a little bit easier. So even though the hair is going to be near impossible, we'll work on that one. So let me come over here. Let me close this down on her like that. So again, I'm just using the crop area tool. To get just the person. So when I'm done, I'll click this little check mark to commit to the crop, and there it is. I can press Control-0. Oops. Control-0. Sorry, I'm on the Windows side to zoom in so that we're seeing her in her full-size image. And now we're going to work on basically cutting her out. And so I'll come over here on the left side, and I'm going to use, if we come down here, there are some selection options. I have an object selection tool, I have a quick selection tool, and I have a magic wand tool. Any one of these can be useful. For me, the quick selection tool tends to work best. We could try the object selection tool and see. And I think I'm going to stick with the quick selection tool. And with the quick selection tool, essentially, I'm going to start by trying to select her. And what Photoshop looks for is it looks for contrast. So it sees that there's a leg and that this is a different color. Now notice also that my cursor, when I'm in the quick selection tool, has a plus in it. And that means that I can let go of the mouse and I can continue with my selection. So I can come over here and I can continue, and it's adding to the selection. Now you see when I did that, it couldn't tell the difference between the inside here. And so it ended up selecting the whole thing. If I hold down the Control key on the keyboard, oops, sorry, Alt key on the keyboard, you'll see that my cursor changes from a plus. So there it is as a plus, it changes to a minus. So that means I'm subtracting from the selection. So then I can come back up the middle here and get rid of that part of it, like that. Looks like I need to add a little bit there. So you can kind of go back and forth. So we'll work our way up here. See, that worked really well because the contrast between the red and the background is really strong. So we'll work our way up there. We've got to do that little fluffy thing. We need her arm. We need that little piece of red. And we'll work our way up to the shoulders. And now the hair gets a little tricky. So we've gotten close to the hair, which is nice. We've got a little bit of hair that's kind of poking out that way. So we'll pop that out. Let's subtract a little bit from that hair, like that. Okay, so I've got a general selection of her. I'm fairly close. Looks like I missed some fingertips here. I can press Control+ to zoom in. I can hold down the spacebar key to pan. And then I can work on selecting these. Now my brush is really big, so selecting these is going to be hard. So I can actually make my brush a little bit smaller. I'll use the bracket keys to make that smaller. There you go. You can see my bracket. I should be able to do it from, oh, it's right here. Sorry. There's my size. I can drag that slider to make it smaller. The reason that I'm dragging it is so that I can kind of go out these fingers like that. Okay, so I've made that selection. Now I want to go up to the Select menu, and I want to choose Select and Mask. So this Select and Mask will bring up a dialog box that will help me with this selection. So we can see that it's already kind of shown me what my selection looks like. It's kind of ghosted out the background, put that checkerboard pattern. So I can see where there are issues. So like there's issues right here along her leg, for example. There's a little bit of issues down here by her toes. But generally it's doing pretty well. Sometimes to see this, we're looking in our view here at what they call the onion skin. But you can also, marching ants isn't going to be useful. Sometimes looking at it either in overlay mode where you see the background in red, or maybe looking at it in where the background is kind of black, or sometimes even as stark as black and white. Those are all different methods of seeing what's happening. Okay, the marching ants really doesn't show much. It's the original selection. So we'll stay away from that right now. Now over here on our refine mode, I'm going to work with color aware for right now. And I'm going to change a couple things. Under our smoothing, I'm going to change this to 3. And under our feather, I'm going to change it to 0.3. And I'm going to check the box for smart radius here under edge detection. So what I can do now is I can come over here, and this is currently our quick selection tool. I can look at several other tools. There is a refine edge brush tool, and there's just a regular brush tool. If I use the refine edge brush tool, this one, what it's going to do is it's going to work to select and basically move. Let me hold down space bar so I can look at her hair here. It's going to work on refining the hair and cutting out the hair. So let me go ahead and hold down the Alt key because I want to subtract from the selection. And I'm going to paint in this little area right there. And it should, let me make my brush a little bit bigger. Ah, there we go. So I didn't have to hold down Alt. See when I paint in there that it's working to find the edges of the hair, and it's making those edges transparent. So let me press Control+ so you can zoom in here just a little bit more. Right, so we've got these little strands of hair. And so as I paint through that strand of hair, it's looking for where the transparent pieces are in that hair and making those transparent. And this is one of the hardest parts of cutting out objects in Photoshop, is when you end up with hair like this. So now over in here where it's all in shadow, there's nothing that's see-through. But in our portion here, we kind of need to work our way over and make sure that those edges become somewhat transparent. So I'll move down here. So I'm just working my way right along the edges in the hair. And this is what's going to ultimately take the most time. So bear with me a little bit. Now, these are all images that we're going to use later on. So the more time you spend right now carefully working on selecting these, the better these images are going to be for using them down the road. So we work through there. Okay, so you see that when I was going through with my brush, I accidentally kind of got rid of part of her shoulder there. So that's where we can flip over back into this regular brush tool. And I can paint that back in so I don't lose that detail anymore. Well, actually it looks, so there's that there. Let's go back to the refine edge. And let's go right along there. Yep, there we go. Let's do up here at the top. Do a little bit right in there. Looks like she has a little bit that's flowing right there, that little hair. I'm going to hold down space bar and pan over. So I can do this side. We need to cut this part out, those little bits of hair that are extending in front of her face. Oh, looks like we're missing a little bit of her cheek. So we can go back to that regular brush tool. And we can actually fill that back in. No, maybe we're not missing it. So go back to refine edge. Oh, that was a little bit too much. So I can just work backwards and forwards with that. So we're going to work the rest of the way down. We need to spend a little bit of time down here in the fingers. And this may take some, yeah, it's just adding it back for me. So let's see if we can't subtract that a little bit more. Oh, right, I have to go back to refine edge. That was my fault. right? So we're basically cutting out where her fingers are. Might have gone a little aggressive there. All right, so that looks pretty good. This edge here looks pretty good. We'll just touch on those just a little bit. All right. Oh, lost a little bit in that fold. Wrong direction. So if you ever have that happen, you pick the wrong, it's not, instead of being a, oops, let me get her nail back right there. Instead of being a minus, it should be a plus. Keep working our way down. Oops, looks like I missed just a little bit on that leg, a little bit on that leg, a little bit on that knee. And I'm almost done. I just have to check on her toes over here. This one's really hard because there's water splashing on her toes. So Photoshop struggled to figure out where her toes were. So this just takes a little bit of manual override like that. Let me press Control-0 so we can see the whole thing. There she is. And when I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And she comes back into Photoshop and nothing happens. And you're like, well, wait a minute, nothing happened. Okay, that's because that we refined the selection, but we didn't actually make the mask yet. So now that we have this selection and it's refined, we're going to come down here by our layers and click on the, it looks like a rectangle with a circle in it. It's add a layer mask. And when we click on add a layer mask, the background's going to become completely transparent, and we're going to have only the person that's left showing. So this is really the power of masking in Photoshop, where we're able to isolate somebody. We can isolate all of that hair, and we can easily, cut her out and then work with it. Now, sometimes there are mistakes. So maybe I want to refine this hand after the fact. So let me press Control+. We'll zoom in a little bit. And let's look at that hand. When this mask exists, I can still work with this mask afterward. So on the mask, I can use my brush tool right here, and I can paint using that brush tool with black and white to cause parts of the image to come back visible or make them go away. So if, for example, I paint in white, which is on top, what I paint is going to come back. So you can see that whatever I'm painting in here is going to come back. So maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, maybe we want to leave a little bit of the shadow here. But if I flip the colors, now I'm painting in black, I can refine that edge after the fact. So I can change what is showing and what is not showing using this tool. So that can be very useful, right? I could cut that out a little bit more. Maybe like that. I'm leaving that little bit of shadow there because I think it helps show it a little bit better. So the point is that even after I've created the mask, I can go back and edit. It's better to do it in one process and try to get it right first. Let me press Control-0 to see everything again. But sometimes you have to go back and make some touch-ups. So I've gone ahead and I've cut her out. So now it's time to work on saving her. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll go to File and then Export, and then I'll export as. Now, previously, we have been saving in JPEG format. If I save in a JPEG format, the background's going to be white. It's not going to be transparent. So this is where we want to use a PNG file. That's going to keep the background transparent, and it's shown by that checkerboard pattern that it's transparent. So I want it to be a PNG. We're going to preserve the transparency. The image size, we're going to leave it at whatever the defaults are. We're not going to cut it down at all. And I'll go ahead and click on Export. And so it would be nice to give this some kind of a name. Let's put it in my folder for today. Let's go to today's folder. So woman running. I'm going to append color to it because it's in color. And I'll click Save. So that's my first cutout. Now, I want to do two things with this before I move on. First one is I want to create a black and white of this, because sometimes when you do collage work, you don't want the full color. So I'll go ahead and create a black and white version. I'm going to go up to my layers, go to New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to do, sorry, a channel mixer. So this is review back to 104 where we were going to do this. Let's call this black and white. And I'll say, okay. And then in the channel mixer, I'm going to check the box for monochrome. And then I'll look through my, I'll look through my presets here and decide which one looks best. And that one looks pretty good. And so I'll go ahead and save this image. Let me go to File, Export, Export As. All the settings are the same. It's still a PNG. We'll click on Export. And so that was woman running color. Let's call her woman running black and white. Okay. And I'll click Save. Now this is the trickiest part, is that I want to create a silhouette of the same person. And it's easy because I already have the mask to do this. So I'm going to create a new layer. So down here at the bottom, I'm going to click on the new layer button. Alternatively, I could go up to Layer, New Layer, either way. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And it creates a new blank layer. We can turn off the black and white for right now. On this blank layer, I want to paint this whole area with a 75% gray. And I pick a 75% gray on purpose. And you'll see next class why that's important. But for right now, we'll just go with it. So I'm going to use my brush tool. I'm going to come down here and change the color. So I'll double click on my black color and I want to change to 75% gray. So it's going to be right about here. But in order to create it, the easiest thing to do is to go in the CMYKs, type in 0, 0, 0, and 75% gray. So this is a perfectly neutral gray. It's not a blue gray. It's not a yellow gray. So it's not a cool gray or a warm gray. It's just a neutral gray. I'll say, OK. That's now my color. And now I need to paint this in. So my brush is really, really small. So let's up my brush size to be nice and big here. And I'm going to paint the whole thing. So I could also use the fill tool. That would do it. But since we've been using the brush tool today, I'm going to keep using the brush tool because it reinforces what we've already covered. I want to make sure that it's fully painted. So I just move my mouse back and forth until the whole thing is nicely painted. So there it is. Okay. Now I want to use this mask right here on this layer so that I can basically cut out this gray. So to copy this mask, I'm going to highlight it. So there it is highlighted. And I'm going to hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, and I'm going to drag the mask up onto the next layer. So you see how it kind of previews my mask. And when I drag it up on the layer above, it's going to cut out using the same mask. It's going to cut out the gray background, which then becomes a silhouette. I can turn off the original, and all I have is the silhouette here. This is also a point where you really see what errors you might have, because some things don't work out quite as you want. We're going to be using these as shadows down the road. So it's OK if they're not quite perfect. So I'll go ahead and go up to File, and then Export, and then Export As. And we'll go ahead and export this. And I'm going to call this gray. I'd call it silhouette, but I don't know how to spell that. So we'll go ahead and leave it like that. So I have the gray version, I have the color version, and I have the black and white version. So I've saved all of those images, and that's my first group of images. Okay, I've asked you to do this 5 times if you get there. That's cutting out objects. And so it's important to get used to cutting out objects, and I want you to spend the bulk of your time doing that. But I also want to introduce the concept of a tiling texture. Now, if you go online, you can actually do searches for tiling textures. So I could go in here and I could say, let's go to Google and let's look for a tiling. Oops. Tiling texture. And you can see there's lots of different examples. So what tiling textures essentially do is it's an image that if you were to put together, they'll continue to seam together over and over and over again. So something like this little, the brick pattern or this tile pattern, if I were to get this image and then use it again, right, I could copy and paste it next to each other and it would appear as if the texture keeps going indefinitely. So you can absolutely create, you can find these online, you can use pre-done examples, but sometimes you want to be able to create your own example. You're looking for a particular texture or pattern, you want to collage on an image. So let's say maybe I wanted wood siding. And again, I'm looking in the Unsplash website. And I'm looking here, and I'm looking for something that I would want to repeat. So something like this might be a good, or something like this might be good. Let's go ahead and use this red one, for example. And while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and download this one. And sometimes a few other examples don't hurt. Now, when I'm doing it, so like this one could be good. Download that one. I'm looking for images that don't have a lot of color variation. So this one may be challenging. It depends, because there's a little bit more shadow along this side than there is on this side. There's also some telltale grain patterns that are going to repeat over and over. And it would be nice not to have those repeating constantly. Let's see what else we might have. Right, so something like this with the shadow going down, that's not a good example. This one actually could be okay. So let's download that. This one here, this siding might be okay. We can download that. So as I'm doing this, I'm kind of downloading different examples. Yeah, I could look for brick siding or whatever. So now that I have a bunch of these examples, let's open some of them and have a look. So let's go to File and then Open. And let's see here. All right, so there was that one that I was talking about. Let's see what this one is. Right, this one's pretty good. Looks like there's a faint little line that would repeat there. And that one's pretty good too. So when we're working with these images, right now, if I were to take this image and copy it next to each other, so let's let me illustrate something here. Let's see. There it is. Oops, I should have, hold on a second. Let me undo that. Right now, the background's locked in order to work on this image. That's a default thing in Photoshop. If I want to work on this image, I need to right click on it and say layer from background. That makes it an active layer instead of being a locked background. And then I'm just making my canvas size bigger so you guys can see this as an illustration. Let's go. Okay, if I were to take this image, copy it, oops, and paste it, if I put it next to itself like that, it would show a seam, right? So those don't seam together. So my goal here is to make this so that it's a seamable image going in all directions. That's what a tiling texture is. So let me step back here. We're back to here. Let me press Control-0. So as I look at this, I want to think carefully about what's happening in the image. So I can certainly have a seam, that's fine, but there's kind of a section here that really doesn't have a lot of repeating patterns. So I'm going to use my crop area tool to really take a chunk of this rather than the whole piece of siding. So let's come down here. Now I also want to kind of envision, okay, let's say that I crop it right to that edge. When I crop the bottom edge, I want to make sure that I'm coming to the same point. So I'm getting to the bottom of a piece of siding and I'm stopping, say, right there. Now I've got a problem because this line here is not straight. This line up here is pretty straight. The bottom line here isn't so straight. let's pull this one over just a little bit, maybe to about, I'm looking at where the nail patterns are. Yeah. Let's go to right about there. And I'll go ahead and commit to the crop for right now. So now I'm down to this size. We can press Control-0. Sorry, since I'm on Windows right now, I keep accidentally pressing the Mac key commands. Okay, so we're okay there at the top. We got to tweak this a little bit at the bottom because this is angled down. So I'm going to use something called the Transform tool. So I'll come down here and I'll go to Transform and I'm going to choose Skew. And my goal here is to make that bottom line kind of straight. See right there, trying to make that one straight. Similar to, I want to make sure that the top here is also straight. Yeah, that one's pretty straight to begin with. All right, that looks pretty good. I'll go ahead and commit to it. And then we can come back and we can crop it a little bit more so that we're getting just to the edge like that. This will be just below. Yeah, it's pretty close. Okay, and I'll commit to that. So I've kind of carefully thought about how I'm working with this, but now it's time to actually make it tiling. It would be close right now, but not perfect. So I'll do that by going into the filter tools, and I'm going to go to filter and then other, and then offset, this last one. And so what this does is it allows me to seam it both horizontally and vertically. So ideally, this number is half of the width of the image that I have. So we can use the sliders to kind of guess at where it is. And you can see that as I pull this over, you can see the seam appear. So that's seaming it horizontally, which means that this edge is going to line up perfectly with that edge. The vertical seam, if I pull this down, is appearing right there, which is actually fairly close. And that was in the setup. So I've set it up so that I have my seam here and I have my horizontal seam there. Now it's time, I'll go ahead and say, okay. Now it's time to make this not seen anymore. And I can do that using something called the clone stamp tool. And that's really the piece of this puzzle that I want to explore today when it comes to tiling textures is this clone stamp tool. It looks kind of like a rubber stamp. We're going to pick on that. And what the clone stamp does is it allows us to copy from one place and move it somewhere else. So let's make the size a little bit bigger. And I'm going to put the hardness at 100% just so I can illustrate this point. So what I do is I choose a place to copy from by holding down the Alt key on the keyboard. So I'll hold down Alt, and it's going to say, choose this as the target. And I click. Then when I let go, you see that it's actually copying that piece wherever I want to go. So I could go right here, or I could go right here, and I could copy it and say, yeah, I want it to go right there. And it's going to, or let's do it there, for example. And it's copying what's over here, over here. So how we blend this together is we'd use, again, the clone stamp, but I'm going to change my hardness to 0 so that now, if I were copying this, and hold down Alt, I'm copying that, it's kind of blurred version. So what I can do is I can come over here, hold down Alt, copy this edge, and I can work right across this seam like that. And now the siding line kind of goes across. Let's do it again down here. Let me hold down Alt, click, and then we can work this one kind of across as well, like that. I can hold down Alt. This one actually needs a little bit more help, so let's kind of run it. Along that edge, like that. Now, I ran into the end, so I got that line because it was copying the line from here. So I might have to come back and copy a little bit more. To write about like that. Now I need these to go away as well. So I'd hold down here and try to blur that transition there. Oops, went too far. Let me undo. And I think oops. Let me copy, Alt, copy from here, and we'll work that side. Now I've got a little bit of a problem here because my colors don't quite match, right? So we're seeing just a little bit of my copies because of color. Oops, sorry, wrong. There you go. Because of color changes that are happening right here. Close that for a second. There we go. So that's where the original image can start to matter. So this tone of kind of pinky orange is different than this tone of pinky orange. So it's harder to make these go together. But in this scenario, I would just continue working my way through to try to make those go away. And the more you kind of work through the clone stamp, the better your results, whoops, that last one was bad, will be. So I'd work my way through. Once I'm done, let me use this as an illustration. So I'll go Control minus, and I'm going to do the same illustration. I'm not asking you to do this part of the illustration. I just want to show you this. So let me go in here and change my canvas size again. So if I took my original image and I copied it and I pasted it, that's going to seem perfectly, whoops, with those. See how that seam happens and you can't tell the difference? Likewise, this one would seem perfectly right there, and we can't tell. So if I spent more time and I more carefully dealt with that seam, these would end up looking like a never-ending piece of siding. So again, I'm having trouble because this pink is different than that pink, or this orange is different than that orange. So a different image might be useful. So maybe this one, I'd spend more time with this one. We could do that same kind of general cropping strategy. It's pretty close right there. Let's pull this one up to right. There. And part of the reason I make these smaller is because I'm getting rid of some of the color variations along the way. So picking the center of the image tends to have less color variation than the sides. So let's say I pick that and we'll commit to it. And then I go back into that filter, offset, excuse me, filter other offset. And we drag the seam. And you can see that I accidentally created a double seam there. So I need to go back before I do the filter offset, and I need to change this cropping to be just a little bit. Come on. There it is. Okay. So we'll commit to it. And then I'll go up to my filter, other, offset. And we can see the seam start to appear in the center there. My vertical seam, it's actually so close, I'm not really sure which one it's on. So let's see here. Yeah, let's go with that one. I'll say okay. So now I can go back into the clone stamp, and we need to make these kind of match up. Let me press Control plus to zoom in. I'll use clone stamp. Let's change the brush size to be a little bit bigger. Maybe even a little bit bigger still. There we go. I'll hold down Alt. And this time I have some kind of grain to worry about working my way through. So if I'm kind of careful with how the grain applies, I should be able to make those start to feel a little bit more seamless. copy this like that. So you can see I'm kind of paying attention to the grain and how the grain might look. So let's go like maybe like that. This can just kind of go away. So this is fundamentally about the clone stamp tool, but you can see that in that section, it's pretty much gone away. And then I can work my way through this section here with some more. Again, I'm just holding down Alt to copy from, and I'm working on merging those two pieces of grain together. Copy that edge right there. And like that. And before you know it, you have pretty much solved the seam problem. Like that. And that then goes away. So if we press Control-0, we can start to see the section that I've healed. And then ultimately these will create those tiling textures. So when you're done, I don't want you to sit here. I know I've already run a little bit long today. Once you're done, you'll go to File, and then you go to Export. And once again, you're going to export as a PNG. So all that set, it's done. We'll click on Export, and this would be my tiling texture. So I'd say tiling texture. And click Save. Okay, so our purpose today is to work on isolating people and to also work on the clone stamp tool. The reason I'm teaching you the clone stamp tool is because I think it's important that you learn how to use the clone stamp, and this is a great way of learning how to use it. And obviously I want to work on that selecting and then masking those objects. Okay, so I know I've gone a little bit long. I apologize for that. For those of you that are in the first session, please just stick around, and I'll get to you guys. If anybody has any questions, let me know. I'm going to stop my screen share right now. Perfect. Are there any questions? No? Perfect. Well, you guys have a great day. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you back on Monday unless I have you in one of my check-ins today.